Good day. I am Liesl Pretorius, legal advisor to Freedom of Religion South Africa, or 4SA for short. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Daniela Illebek, also an attorney and legal advisor with 4SA. Today, we will be discussing the CRL Rights Commission's Religious Freedom Survey. Now, the purpose of this important survey is to determine how the faith communities of South Africa experience religious freedom on a day-to-day basis in their daily lives, and if religious freedom is sufficiently protected. So, your participation in the Religious Freedom Survey is critical, especially for helping to identify areas where religious freedom is or has been in danger of erosion. Now, the deadline for participating in the survey has been extended. So now you have until Tuesday, the 31st of October, 2023, to complete it. So do not miss out on doing your part to help protect religious freedom in South Africa. Now, the survey consists of various questions. And the first one is whether you believe that your rights and responsibilities to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion, so this is basically religious freedom for short, as guaranteed by Section 15 of the South African Constitution, is properly considered, respected, and protected in our current government policies and laws. So the laws and policies that are currently on the books at the moment. So Daniela, what would your answer be to this? Is religious freedom properly respected and upheld by our existing laws and policies?
So, Liesl, the short answer is no. The right to freedom of religion, thought, belief, conscience, and religion, which you said, for short, we just call religious freedom, is entrenched as an enforceable and justiciable right in our Constitution, which means you can go to court if it gets infringed by either the state or another personal entity. And this is also a right that may only be limited in terms of the Constitution's own stringent 36 limitation test. Now, however, when you speak about the existing government laws and policies, so everything outside of the Constitution, and you're asking whether or not this right to freedom of opinion, thought, belief, conscience, and religion is sufficiently protected by these laws, the answer is no, because several of these laws indirectly or directly limit and infringe the right to religious freedom without passing, in 4SA opinion, the Constitution's limitation test. Now, first we want to emphasize that while it may not be the intention of these laws and policies to erode religious freedom, the way they are worded gives rise to these unintended bad consequences. And as 4SA, we make it our mission to identify these problems and to point them out to government so they can be fixed, because the Constitution mandates the government to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the right to religious freedom. Now, turning to what existing laws 4SA is concerned about, the top three of these are the Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Anti Terrorism Act, and the Equality Act. Now, Lisa, why is the Anti-Money Laundering Act relevant to religious freedom? Because money laundering, religious freedom, they seem to be two completely different topics.
Yes, Daniela. So the Anti-Money Laundering Act was brought in to curb money laundering and money going to terrorist activities. But as many of these acts, as you said, they have unintended consequences. And one of the major consequences of the Anti-Money Laundering Act is that certain categories of non-profit organizations, or NPOs for short, will now be forced to register with the Department of Social Development's NPO Directorate and also comply with the requirements of the Non-Profit Organizations Act. So any affected organizations will now have to do this, and if they fail to, they will face administrative sanctions, which even include fines. Now, who are these affected NPOs? These are those NPOs that make donations to individuals, organizations outside of the Republic of South Africa's borders, and also organizations that provide humanitarian, charitable, religious, educational, cultural services outside of the Republic's borders. Now, religious organizations often make donations to foreign missionaries, churches, etc. And also, religious organizations often provide a wide range of social services, including sending missionaries overboard or other humanitarian services even. So what this basically means is that many unregistered religious organizations will now fall within this category of affected NPOs, and they will have to register, which means additional red tape to jump through before they can fulfill their mission and mandate, which is to do good. And many NPOs, including religious organizations, have very limited resources. We are in tough economic times, and they use a lot of volunteers. So with the additional burden, financial burden, administrative burden, resources burden of all this red tape and complying with the NGO Act, a valid question is how many of these organizations will be forced to close their doors? And ultimately, if organizations that do such public good as many religious organizations do, if they do close their doors, the people of South Africa in general and the beneficiaries of the specific services that they render will be the losers. So that is a concerning consequence that we would want to see avoided. You mentioned the Anti Terrorism Act. Now, terrorism, oh, that sounds very serious. What's terrorism got to do with religious freedom, Daniela?
Again, terrorism, religious freedom, they sound like two completely exclusive aspects. Now, when it comes to the Anti-Terrorism Act, the major issue is that its definition of terrorist activity is over 2 A4 pages long. So that's a very wide definition. And on top of that, this definition contains broad and vague phrases, which means that the act is open to abuse. And this is very bad because it means that activities that are not terrorist activities could potentially be mislabeled as such. Now, this is especially concerning because recently certain civil society organizations have been labeled by government as quote unquote instigating terrorism and quote unquote sabotage. So as a consequence, the Anti-Terrorism Act could potentially be abused to criminalize the voices of those opposing government actions and or curbing civil society's dialogue and actions in what is supposedly a participatory constitutional democracy based on human rights and freedoms. Now, Liesl, given that the religious community is often at the forefront of calling to account or criticizing government, or even facilitating public participation in elections, the lawmaking process, and other civil society activities, this is particularly concerning to the religious organizations and leaders. And we can't afford to have a law on the books that would allow unscrupulous individuals to target powerful and popular religious and or other voices that oppose the government by mislabeling them as terrorists. And in a nutshell, that is the problem with the Terrorist Act. Now, Liesl, one of the laws we also mentioned as the top 3 laws, we said was the Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Terrorism Act, and we said it was the Equality Act. Now, what is ironic is that the Equality Act poses a threat to religious freedom. Could you tell us more about this?
Yes, it's very ironic because religious freedom is also an equality right. So one would think that the Equality Act protects and promotes religious freedom as well. But what does the Equality Act do? Let's first look at that. Basically, 3 things. It prohibits unfair discrimination. That discrimination can be in the form of conduct or speech, and it contains a fairness test to determine whether this discrimination was fair or unfair. It also prohibits hate speech, and it prohibits harassment. Now, thankfully, the Equality Act's definition of hate speech has recently been considered and improved by the Constitutional Court in the landmark case of Kulani versus the South African Human Rights Commission. But the act is still problematic from a religious freedom viewpoint, especially in the context of when you have expressed beliefs on sex and gender, for example. Many people of faith hold to a more traditional binary view on sex and gender. And if you are such a person of faith and the doctrines of your religion, your particular faith holds to such a view, it would be very wise and prudent when expressing that view to respectfully affirm the equal value and worth of all people, including those who might hold to other views on sex and gender. This, of course, is not the same as endorsing those views, but it is an affirmation that all human beings have constitutional rights, all human beings have equal worth and value and human dignity, which is important. But going back to the Equality Act, we are concerned that over the past couple of years, the act has been weaponized against persons of faith. And for that reason, 4SA has been involved in an increasing number of cases. For for protecting the right to religious freedom in that regard. When it comes to discrimination, one of the problems with the existing act is that it contributes to the easy targeting of persons and organizations of faith because it fails to explicitly recognize and require that other fundamental rights that are germane to the issue at hand are taken into account when, for example, you have a case of alleged unfair discrimination. What are other fundamental rights? Religious freedom is a fundamental right that must be considered when you determine whether a specific issue is whether there was unfair discrimination or not, for example. So the result is that this act creates this impression and it is applied as if there's a hierarchy of rights. And the right to equality, Section 9 of the Constitution, is right at the top, and all the other rights are subject to it. But that's not the correct view. The Constitutional Court has at numerous times emphasized that the Constitution knows no hierarchy of rights. So what's the right way to approach this thing? When you have fundamental rights that are in conflict with each other, for example, the right to equality based on sex, gender, sexual orientation, you've got religious freedom, which is also a fundamental right, they should be reconciled. Because in a constitutional democracy that's based on human rights and freedoms, we want to recognize and maximize the enjoyment of fundamental rights of all people. That's a constitutional ideal. So
maximizing freedom should be the ideal.
It's maximizing freedom.
Yeah. And that means somehow getting all the rights to work together in the public realm and not seeing them as being in conflict with one another.
Exactly. And that's true inclusivity. That's mature democracy. Recognizing human rights of people who are different than you are.
It's true tolerance, actually.
It's true tolerance. It's true inclusivity. And the state has a constitutional duty to protect and promote all the rights in the Bill of Rights without preferring one another. So as the Equality Act currently reads and is interpreted and applied, it leads in practice to unfair discrimination, ironically. Unfair discrimination allegations against religious people who run, for example, private businesses according to their religious beliefs and who faced a biased test, an uphill battle to prove that the discrimination was indeed fair discrimination, because the Constitution does not prohibit, the Equality Act does not prohibit discrimination, it prohibits unfair discrimination, and that's a very important distinction. It also leads to hate speech allegations against religious people who express religious views that others find offensive, however lovingly or respectfully that view is expressed. So what that means is what is becomes an offense is not hate speech, but speech that some people hate. And that's an important distinction. So that is troubling. But luckily we have this survey. And the survey is so important so that the CRL Rights Commission can become aware of these issues. So, Daniela, where can people, our listeners, viewers, find the survey in order to participate in it?
Yeah, so Liesl, you said two things there about the Equality Act that it just highlights it so well, is that actually your right to religion, belief, and conscience are grounds that the state and actually anybody else is not allowed to unfairly discriminate against you. But because this Equality Act fails to take into account whether other fundamental rights, like religious freedom, for example, are being exercised when there's an allegation of unfair discrimination, it in actual practice leads to the state unfairly discriminating against religious people, which is it's so ironic because, again, the Equality Act is supposed to grant everyone the right to or to flesh out the right that the Constitution grants everybody to being equal in front of the law. But yes, turning to your question about where listeners can find the survey. So 4SA, again, has tried to make it very easy. Now, although this is a CRL survey, listeners can find it by visiting the 4SA website at www.forsa.org.za. And on the homepage, they'll see a large CRL religious freedom banner and image at the top of the page. And if they click on it, it will take them through to a landing page with all the necessary information, a video, some draft responses from 4SA to get people thinking, even though the survey is aimed at people's daily life. So I do want to say this. The draft responses are just there to get you thinking and to get the mental juices flowing, because in the end, you're a parent and you will know from your experience whether or not your right to raise your child in accordance with your beliefs and values are being infringed by your child's school. And you will know whether or not you have posted stuff on social media as an expression of your faith that you have had repercussions for. And Forrest, I can't emphasize enough what a unique and important opportunity the survey is for identifying areas where freedom of religion, conscience, belief, opinion, thought must be protected more robustly. Now, the survey results will guide government departments, because again, the CRL is a state institution, on how to draft and implement rules and policies that will impact you and your children's lives. So please complete the survey before the extended deadline, Tuesday, the 31st of October, last day of the month, October. And for more information, visit our website or visit the Freedom of Religion SA Facebook page or YouTube channel.
This is Michael Swain of 4SA. Remember to like and share this video and then click on the subscribe button to make sure that you never miss our video updates on vital religious freedom issues.